So, welcome to the Chaos Cast. We are glad to have you here. And today we're going to be starting out talking about just a very sad incident, especially for the homesteading community, the natural grow community, organic growing community, and we're going to kind of discuss why it's important to have these farms and probably some of the reasons his farm may have been hit. Now, it's when you're a prepper, you can't just think about the food. You have to be thinking ahead about when the food runs out. That's kind of part of it. And I'm more of a preparedness enthusiast than just a doomsday prepper. I'm more or less trying to be prepared for economic instability, rapid inflation, country, society collapsing, the country destabilizing as far as government goes, because it has happened through the years, and we have to be mindful of that being an event. So I want to show you real briefly just this one news story, and we're going to pull it up and we're going to share it. There we go. And so you have this Oklahoma farm that was devastated. They're not sure if they can get back on their feet to feed customers. Now, one of the things that is happening that's great is the community is coming around and buying what they do have left. But Russick Farms believes they were targeted and that some sort of plant poison was sprayed on their produce, killing nearly everything. The plants were left curled up with withered leaves, and most of the produce was days away from being in the hands of customers. They're going to say, we've got 1,700 tomato plants this year, hundreds of squash and zucchini, cucumbers, eggplants, you name it, we grow it here, and just about all of it has taken a hit, said Michael Russick, the owner of the farm. So that's what his job is full time, is to grow organic food. Now, a lot of you, if you're like me and my family, you are focusing on buying more naturally sourced, organically grown food, and some of it is top grade organic food if you get it from the right people in the right places. Some of it is commercialized organic food, and that's a whole nother podcast for a whole nother time. But these farms are important, but they are putting a press now up on the industry to the point the industry is trying to commercialize organic growing, which is good in some ways if it brings about the change that's needed. But all in all, this is a part of a bigger problem. The corporations have controlled a lot of things, and I'm not going to say corporations are always a bad thing, but when they're running things like they are now, that's not always the best of things. Now, this mode of corporate farming has caused a lot of problems in our world. It's caused a lot of soil erosion, the mass tilling of the soil, the chemical fertilizers. Those things are different issues that are causing problems in our community, and it's unseen problems because you don't face it you don't face it every day in your face. You don't even know this is happening so much sometimes because we go to the grocery store to get our food. We don't realize what's happening, how that food gets there, to the point you have people that are animal rights activists that go to the store and buy chicken and beef because they source their killing out to other places. But yeah, we've seen this big push to go towards the Crichton proteins, the crickets. Now, right now, Nevada, there's a city in Nevada right now that's dealing with a Mormon cricket infestation that's basically took over the whole town. So that's pretty gross. They're getting a little taste of what is to come, or what people are pushing for. Now, the Gates Foundation is heavily pushing these Crichton proteins, this synthetic meat, this plant-based proteins. A number of big-time organizations that work especially with the UN and the WEF are big on these types of methods because they feel like, well, we can feed the whole world. But I don't feel like these are the solutions. One thing, if you have an allergy towards shellfish, you can react to the chitin proteins. And I've had to be very careful about this because I have a son that has shellfish allergies. So we have topsoil erosion that is happening across the world. And we're going to look at another article here. Let's see here. All right. Let's see. Yeah. So this is from Time Magazine, and this is what if the world's soil runs out? A broken food system is destroying the soil and fueling health crisis, as well as conflicts, warns Professor John Crawford of the University of Sydney. Um, let's see. It goes on to say some experts fear the world as it's at its current pace of consumption is running out of unusable topsoil. The World Economic Forum, in collaboration with Time, talked to University of Sydney Professor John Crawford on the systemic implications soil erosion and degradation may have in the decades to come. So is soil really in danger of running out? Now, the rough calculation of current rates of soil degradation suggests we have about 60 years of topsoil left. Some 40% of soil used for agriculture around the world is classed as either degraded or seriously degraded. The latter means that 70% of the topsoil, the layer allowing plants to grow, is gone because of various farming methods that strip the soil of carbon and make it less robust as well as weaker in nutrients. Soil is being lost at between 10 and 4 times the rate at which it can be naturally replenished. Even the well-maintained farming land in Europe, which may look idyllic, is being lost at unsustainable rates. So what they're basically talking about is a form of desertification. The soil is becoming unusable. We're seeing dead zones. And one place where we lost a lot of topsoil is the Dust Bowl. It was during the 1930s. There was this manifest destiny thing going on in America. There was settlement acts going on, so people were put out into the prairie lands and pushed to make farms because they believed if they could get crops growing, it would make it less arid. But what actually happened is that soil there was a certain process and we'll talk about that later that created those grasslands and kept those grasslands working as a specific type of grassland ecosystem. And when they began to till the soil and exposed it to the sun, it began to kill microbiology that had been going for years. It began to destroy the whole ecosystem because it worked for the first couple of years. They had a lot of rain. The soil was great, but then they had a drought. And the ensuing drought began to pick up that fine powdery dirt that was created from all the tilling and the over, I guess you'd say the foundering of the land. They had just continually grown on this land. And you had a lot of farmers that were first-time farmers, inexperienced farmers that went out here and they contributed to this. And this is one of the greatest man-made natural disasters that America ever experienced. And we lost a lot of hybridized seed. We lost a lot of hybridized seed. We lost a lot of heirloom seed, family seed that was passed on from family to family. And that's where the hybridized seeds were brought into the picture. You had one of the things when I was looking into this when it was invented, and I already knew, but said they were invented all the way back in the 1700s, I believe, maybe the 15 or 1600s. 1717 is where the first notable account of this is, but it was mainly in the 1930s during the Depression. A lot of that was because of all the seed that people lost, and they would just pick up and leave and quit farming. Because it wasn't just the inexperienced farmers that it affected all of the farmers that were there. And it's caused just a natural devastation. And that caused what we call desertification. And so desertification is a type of land degradation in dry lands, like the grasslands were, the arid land, in which biological productivity is lost due to natural process or induced by human activity, whereby fertile areas become arid. is the spread of arid areas caused by a variety of factors such as climate change and overexploitation of the soil as a result of human activity. Throughout geological history, the development of deserts has occurred naturally in recent times. The potential influences of human activity, improper land management, and deforestation and climate change, which I believe climate change is more or less because of this man-made activity more than it is, um, you know, releasing too much carbon into the carbon monoxide into the air, carbon dioxide in there, whatever. I said the wrong thing. Um, but it goes on to talk about this desertification process, and it gives us a map here. Um, the desertification vulnerability. Notice all this is the cold areas that you really don't have to worry about all that, which that right there is very surprising that it's that cold. But yeah, the very high areas are red. And so you see this in middle America where a lot of the Dust Bowl took place. The moderate, high, and very high areas are all in the middle part of America, all the way down in Mexico. And then you kind of start seeing the humid, not vulnerable, that can't be, you couldn't hardly do anything to it to stop it, down in South America, the Amazon rainforest. I think this encompasses most of the Amazon rainforest in different areas, but South America is good. Europe is very good in a lot of areas. Africa is good right here in the middle. And then you see Asia, China, North South Korea, that they're pretty good. A little strip up through here. Most of your Polynesian islands here, and then you got a small little part of Africa, Australia here. I think you got Tasmania, and then I think that is Lord help. I remember if I wasn't trying to, but um, New Zealand, I believe it is. So they're good. They're good to go. But these areas are around the Sahara. We're seeing all this desertification of farmland down in South Africa in certain areas. Now you do see it here in this area in South America, and then you see it all over in the Middle East and in these areas. And so desertification is an issue. It's they even believe that the Sahara Desert at one time was a highly, it was highly populated. They had crops. There was something that changed that devastated it and causes it to be this huge, desert. Now, one thing to note, right in this area, there is a place that people have found, and it's like a bunch of rings. And a lot of people have been hinting at that they believe this was the lost city of Atlantis, and that's a theory. But they've actually went out there and there's been people that have done digs, and they found the evidence that there was a seagoing community. So they believe there was something happened in this area, and maybe possibly that there was, maybe this was covered with water in certain areas. It was a more humid place with more growth, and something happened that caused a draining at some point. Maybe there was a sea here, and then it drained, and or it dried up over a certain amount of time because of a weather change. But that is what they say, what a lot of studies have rendered. I've seen that. You can go look this up. I'm scratching my nose. You can go and look this up online about this place, and it's a fascinating looking place. It's huge, and the only reason they found it was because of satellites. They were able to use satellites, and they found this place, and so that is something of note to think about. Now, that's just getting off on a tangent and having a little fun here. But desertification is a real thing. The Dust Bowl was a form of that. They believe it was a part of man-made causes. And some of the things right now that are contributing to this desertification are the use of chemical fertilizers. So chemical fertilizers have been around for, I think since the 1800s. They had, and it started with superphosphate. And then you had some others. This was all pre-war. You had different companies, and they were coming out with things like ammonium sulfate, nitro chalk. Let's see, ammonium phosphate later on, and then ammonium sulfate. and they were using them in Europe, and then North America began to start using them. Especially, they started fooling around with it in the 1930s, but then by World War II, they began to up production of nitrogen, ammonium nitrate, because nitrogen is nitrate's used a lot in. I said nitrogen. The nitrate was used a lot in explosives, and so you had World War II, and you had this massive boom of factories getting things ready for the war. So when they got done, they had all these factories producing basically fertilizer, and so they started marketing chemical fertilizers for crops instead of the manure that people for eons had used. Um, so these chemical fertilizers, they didn't realize when they were inventing them what they were going to do to the soil. Now, this is again, it says with the start of World War II, there was a tremendous increase in nitrogen production, mainly because nitrogen is a principal ingredient in explosives. The government constructed 10 new plants to produce ammonia for munitions when the World War II began, all located in the interior of the country. Most were located near natural gas pipelines, so they could use the gas as raw material for nitrogen production. By the end of the world, the plants. By the end of the world, By the end of the war, the plants were producing 730,000 tons of ammonia each year and had capacity to produce 1.6 million tons. So after World War II, the need to manufacture war munitions was replaced with the need to restore food supplies in Europe and the United States. So they'd already come up with a lot of hybridized seeds, and this was mainly utilized around the hybridized seeds were basically introduced to help reinvigorate the seeds in around the 1930s because of all the loss during the Dust Bowl. And then World War II comes along. You got the perfect storm. You got hybridized seeds that highly react to nitrogen, and then you have these chemical fertilizers. So we begin the process of over farming with row crops. We begin to draw too much nutrients out of the natural chemical nutrients that is in the soil already out as we grow, and we replace it with these chemical fertilizers, and these things devastate our soil. They oxidize our soil. They begin to create dead zones. They begin to help aid in desertification in some areas of the world, all while we were trying to fix the problem. And there's been some crazy things that have happened because of these problems that we've had. And Alan Savory, now I watched a TED Talk of his a number of years ago, and Alan Savory has some very good points to make, but he tells the story of kind of what got him into holistic management. So I'm going to start on 54 seconds in.
Of our rising population, rising towards 10 billion people.
Let's go back.
Facing that reality with the full belief that we can solve our problems with technology, and that's very understandable. Now, this perfect storm that we are facing is the result of our rising population, rising towards 10 billion people, land that is turning to desert, and of course, climate change.
I believe the deserts, land turning deserts, what's causing the climate change for real.
We will only solve the problem of replacing fossil fuels with technology. But fossil fuels, carbon, coal, and gas, are by no means the only thing that is causing climate change.
So I'm going to pause it there and move ahead. 126. Maybe on it right now. Okay, we're already there.
Is a fancy word for land that is turning to desert. And this happens only when we create too much bare ground. There's no other cause. And I intend to focus on most of the world's land that is.
And see, this is what happened in the Dust Bowl era. And it's what's happening around the world.
I have for you a very simple message that offers more hope than you can imagine. We have environments where humidity is guaranteed throughout the year. On those, it is almost impossible to create vast areas of bare ground, no matter what you do. Nature covers it up so quickly. And we have environments where we have months of humidity followed by months of dryness.
Now, he's real monotone, but he brings out interesting things.
Fortunately, with space technology now, we can look at it from space. And when we do,
again, you're seeing the same things we've seen on that map
fairly well. Generally, what you see.
Some of this is natural.
Desertifying, and what you see in brown is. And these are by far the greatest areas of the Earth. About 2/3, I would guess, of the world is desertifying. I took this picture in the Tihama Desert while 25 millimeters, that's an inch of rain, was falling. Think of it in terms of drums of water, each containing 200 liters. Over 1,000 drums of water fell on every hectare of that land that day. The next day, the land looked like this. Where had that water gone? Some of it ran off as flooding, but most of the water that soaked into the soil simply evaporated out again, exactly as it does in your garden if you leave the soil uncovered. Now, because the fate of water and...
Now, say this makes perfect sense. Now, there's a lot of different things to think about here. There are people that plant cover crops to keep the sun off the ground, to help keep the soil moist. I utilize hay and wood chips and different things to cover ground to help keep the weeds from growing first off, but to help keep the soil moist. And what he goes into here in a second, we're going to go to 856 because I don't want to get no copyrights for playing too much of his video. I can do responses legally, from what I understand. I hope I can find it. All right.
Anyway, what we had failed to understand was that these seasonal humidity environments of the world, the soil and the vegetation developed with very large numbers of grazing animals. And that these grazing animals developed with ferocious pack hunting predators. Now, the main defense against pack hunting predators is...
He kind of explains his whole point here.
The larger the herd, the safer the individuals. Now, large herds dung and urinate all over their own food, and they have to keep moving. And it was that movement that prevented the overgrazing of plants, while the periodic trampling ensured good cover of the soil, as we see where a herd has passed. This picture is a typical seasonal grassland. It has just come through 4 months of rain, and it's now going into 8 months of dry season. And watch the change as it goes into this long dry season. Now, all of that grass you see above ground has to decay biologically before the next growing season. And if it doesn't, the grassland and the soil begin to die. Now, if it does not decay biologically, it shifts to oxidation, which is a very slow process, and this smothers and kills grasses, leading to a shift to woody vegetation and bare soil. Climate change. We cannot burn it without causing desertification and climate change. What are we going to do?
He gives you a good idea of what to do here.
The ancient Egyptians understood that they could use sound.
Skip that ad.
There is only one option.
There's only one option.
I repeat to you, only one option left to climatologists and scientists, and that is to do the unthinkable and to use livestock, bunched and moving, as a proxy for former herds and predators and mimic nature.
So at one part, I believe we've done past it, he talks about one of the sad things he had to do because of this false knowledge that they had, that more animals, the more desertification. So that really makes no sense because you had massive amounts of animals that were left unchecked, mainly only by animal predators in some areas of the world, and they done great. I mean, the herds of bison were huge in America, and that's, according to what he's saying, that was what caused that very delicate, balanced ecosystem of the grasslands in this arid part of the world. Also, it's what caused it in Africa and certain other areas. These massive herds stomping the grass down, taking a dump, getting chased, having to move, and because they couldn't eat what they stomped down and pooped on anymore. And if you don't believe that, you could have took a look at our goats plenty of times. They wouldn't eat the hay that they pulled out and stomped down anymore. But anyways, they would move, and that would basically fertilize and cover that soil and allow it to keep moisture. Um, but he's come up with a solution. Now you see these animal rights activists that um, don't like homesteaders. You see people like Justin Rhodes and different ones that have they have local law enforcement called, and they file false allegations against these homesteaders on YouTube a lot of times. And to the point, Justin Rhodes has developed a great, and if you don't know who he is, look him up on YouTube. He's got a lot of great homesteading content. That's what he does, for a living now, and he grows all his own food. But anyways, he has a great relationship with the police because of these animal rights activists that don't want him to, to farm in a sustainable way because he's butchering his own animals instead of hiring it out to mass processing centers. Okay, which most of the world of America is doing right now, and even some animal rights activists that still eat meat. Um, and then there is the animal exploitation just to grow crops. So we don't even going to get into that. But the solution he's given is what they're fighting against us in America. The problem that we have is the corporations, and the corporations are trying anything and everything to please these people that they think are going to boycott them, these rights activist groups. And PETA and a number of these are some of the people, because you keep seeing these vegan products come out. And I'm going to tell you that's a load of garbage, because I'm going to guarantee you in some way, vegans claim to not want to do any kind of exploitation of animals. Okay. That's garbage, because when you really know what's going on, I mean, Pierce Morgan brought up some good points. um, they brought up some good points on Yellowstone, if you ever watched that, about the planning process and the animals that die in that process. And so that's their solution to their problem. We don't want to see these animals die, but his problem would actually be cool with these people, because you would be able to have these animals in happy environments, and they would be contributing to the health of the soil for natural growing. We got so many chemicals and so much garbage and stuff in our food because it's so highly processed. And again, World War II era was when a lot of this was happening as America was industrializing. That's when this was happening. You have people leaving farms, going to jobs. They needed food that was, semi-healthy, because they couldn't farm their own. They were working jobs, and they needed good, healthy, quick food. And so it started out in a good manner, but it's got to the point where everybody's took advantage of that convenience. And so then the corporations, as people moved over to the grocery store, the corporations took over the farms, and their chemical exploitations of the soil and hybridized seed has depleted tons of our soil. And we see our agriculture sectors fighting to keep the biodiversity up in our soil. Now, a lot of the things that people freak out about, them tilling under crops, that's not as much the government trying to destroy the food supply chain. They're desperately trying to get that biomaterial back into the soil, so that they're putting some nutrients back into the soil. They want the farmers to do these things. And then there's times farmers let fields they don't grow on them for a couple of years. They let them go fallow. You see this especially now in the natural growing community. These people, they're starting these homesteads to try and supply their local networks. Now, the solution is the solution to the problem is the problem to their solution that's not working. That's what happens when you lose corporations and governments with your life, your sustenance, and your income. They come up with these mass solutions that destroy some part of your life. There's a reason for all these eons we have put up food in the winter. We've grown in the summer. We've grown crops. We've foraged. We've hunted. We've raised animals. There's reasons why we did what we did, because when you do a homestead in the right way, it works with the ecosystem. A whole ecosystem forms around it. You know, you have the animals you have the rodents, and you have the infestations, but then you have the animals that come in to the predators and the other bugs that come in to take care of those problems. And then, you know, you have this ecosystem that depends on those homesteads. And this has been going on for eons. You know, I believe this is the way God intended it. And this is what he's offering. He's just offering a different way of doing it than what we've done for this. You know, it's an infinitesimal amount of time that we've been doing hybrid seeds, row crops, and mass factory farming and chemical fertilizers. And there's a lot of solutions right there on your door. You can make your own soil. I've made soil from the defecation from my rabbits and my chickens. And the one clue that I have that's really good soil is that the worms like it. And so I have made a raised bed out of this soil. Now I've been making this soil for a while. Been a lot in it. I've got a lot of rabbit poop and chicken poop and some pig poop left from the pigsty that I put in there along with regular dirt, and dirt that would grow to a certain degree. I had bumper crops of stuff. The same dirt that I was planting in that I put in this raised bed mixed with all this other soil that I made, where it wouldn't yield tomatoes. Now I'm getting tomatoes, you know. And I've done this naturally without chemical fertilizers. And so I'm going to be in a process of swapping over to making my own soil, because it may come down to that as a homesteader, as a person who wants healthy food for your kids. It may come down to you making your own soil. But, you know, he goes into all this about how he killed so many thousands of elephants off of these reserves so that the land would have enough animals, but yet, so it'd have enough food for a certain amount of animals, but yet it continued to desertify. And he's seen the same thing in America happening. And that was after the buffalo were killed off, the massive herds of buffalo. So then he tries this method and realizes he did not have to kill all of those elephants. So sometimes you need to question your government, because the decision they're making now is not the best decision, especially going forward. And it, causes more harm than good. Now, there's another story I want to look at. And now this one is of a project that David Bamberger started in Texas 50 years ago. Now, we'll start with the beginning right here, and it just kind of shows you this.
Oh, beautiful.
It starts with this pristine area of what used to be desert, scrubland.
50 years ago, you couldn't hardly walk through this place.
And you look at how lush of an oasis this is in an arid country.
Nobody.
Let's see what 150, 126. That's what we're looking for.
One in.
Your bug spray should take out bugs.
My gosh. Trying to do a podcast here, y'all putting on these dabbling commercials. But anyways, it's going to show where he worked for Church's Chicken. And he ended up deciding to invest in this property. Man alive. Try to do it. I might have to edit this out. But anyways.
I teamed up with a young man, Bill Church, and it was Church's Fried Chicken. And we built that company up to over 1,600 stores, and we sold it. And with that capital, I was able to come here and begin my work on Sela.
So again, this was desert. I believe he shows.
The objective was to take the worst piece of land they could possibly find in the hill country of Texas and begin a process of restoration that would change it back to be one of the best, and that has happened right here. By habitat restoration, by working with Mother Nature instead of against her. That's what we're all about. It was 46 years ago.
So he shows what he used to get it to this point.
7 water wells.
We're over here to 418.
500 foot deep. Not a one produced any water. The top 125 foot of these hills looks like this.
So this is the rock he started with.
Limestone.
He had to get water into those reservoirs.
He said, Ben Burger, there's one place up here on the top, my bit dropped 40 foot. He said, you've got a cavern under there. It's like an auditorium. The only thing about it was, 46 years ago, it had no water in it. It was dry.
And so he shows how he fills that reservoir.
The hill country is just covered with woody species. Primarily, it's cedar. We took out a great portion of it here on the ranch. We were just covered with it. We had no grass. When we took out the cedars and spread native grass seeds, and it began to grow, the rainfall then percolated into the earth because of the root system of grass going down. Water percolates in, it fills up your aquifer until the aquifer is full. And when it's full, it has to come out somewhere, and they call that a spring. That spring supplied water for all the nature critters, plus for all the families that live here, and even sends water downstream to the city of Austin. What does it cost? Our governments and governments all around the world.
All right, so that gives you a good idea of just the situations that we've created in some ways, but we can rectify with these simple solutions. This guy goes on to talk about how within 2 years they seen their first spring. Then I think another 2 or 3 years they started seeing more. Like they had a water table there. Then they had ponds. Water began to fill. Now one of the things that he talks about is this huge cavern. Now one of the things in my area, we live in a very humid, green area, Appalachia, and we have tons of sinkholes. And usually, if you're out in the woods and you need water, a good old water seat, you find one. There's going to be some water for drinking. You might want to treat it. I'm going to tell you, don't drink that without treating it. You can do so at your own risk. So you heard it here. Well, you can't say I told you to drink water from rocks. But anyways, we have a lot of sinkholes. We have a lot of caverns. So the water, there's places for the water to go. But what he's talking about is the grass. So when they tilled up all of that grass out in American grasslands and what was an arid property, arid land, they uncovered the soil. And then it didn't take but a good drought to come through and cause one of the greatest natural disasters that America has ever seen. The greatest natural man-made disasters America's ever seen. And it caused this mass desertification. So this man, David Bamberger, his idea of grass coupled with Alan Savory's idea of holistic management, and that can be used to restore land. Now, if you go back in some of my videos that you see on one of the platforms, I have a day where I go out to target practice and shoot on the range. And I'm in what's called a chert pit in Alabama. And there's these pits because they use this for foundations. They use it for the foundations of roads, houses. They put these chert pads up for people to build houses on. And they have these chert pits where, in some areas they were naturally exposed. Well, then they went in and excavated it. And they get into the part where they excavate actual areas that weren't exposed to forest and trees. And we still see this today. Private, contractors will buy this land just to dig the chert up. They'll sell the topsoil to a person to make garden beds or whatnot around their house. And what they do, they'll even sell what they pull off somebody else's property. You'll pay them to take it away. They'll haul it off and sell it. They make double the money for, just that little bit of work. But then they'll buy land when they get in that, mode of selling at certain times of year, and they'll just strip it clean down to the chert. And it kind of devastates these areas. It causes a lot of what you've seen Alan Savory talking about, where the water falls and what don't wash away, it just gathers in these pools. And most of the time, it will evaporate. Sometimes we used to have some puddles that would stay around during a lot of rain, and you'd have a lot of tadpoles, and we'd wade out there in this red clay mud, and we would, collect tadpoles and put them in the fish tank at the house, just goofing off. And we had a lot of little frogs that come up out of that too. Mom and Daddy had to make us quit bringing tadpoles home. But anyways, one of the things I've seen at this local one, this it's basically a defunct neighborhood shooting range. You know, you got high walls, you're risking it, a bullet going anywhere except, you know, the target or the wall behind it, wall of rocks, wall of chert rock and chert mud. So we go up there and we shoot. But one of the things, you know, over the years since they first built the new Highway 72 out here, they that was where most of the chert come from, was this chert pit near my road. So this main interstate they was creating, well, they were destroying something else for those materials. But I've seen this natural comeback, and it always starts with grass. It'll start with some pine trees, and the pine trees and the grass will begin to, you know, create, you know, soil. It'll begin to fall. It'll degrade. It'll decay, begin to get into the soil, and then you'll see other plants come in. You'll see the weeds that come into waste areas, which a lot of them are medicinal, a lot of them are edible. So hey, if you got an old chert pit near your house, there's tons of food growing there. I've seen, just in that one place, I've seen cattails, I've seen I've seen plantain, burdock, Queen Anne lace, elderberries, blackberries, strawberries. Then there's the tadpoles. You can eat them if you get too hungry. Crickets, pine tree. You know, you can eat pine, the cambrium out of a pine tree. So, but I'm not counseling you to go foraging. You get some good advice and an experienced person to go with you before you do that. That is a disclaimer. Yes, because I don't want you getting over there eating poison hemlock instead of Queen's Anne lace and killing yourself. Because I almost had a friend die from that confusion in his infancy of his forage learning experience. Yeah, he's something dangerous. But luckily his wife was a nurse, kept him from dying. But I've slowly watched this. It's a slow process on its own. Now imagine if we turned a bunch of goats loose. Now I've heard instances of people, the only land they could buy to start their homestead. And I read this in Mother Earth News. This was an article a couple of months back where these people bought this barren, arid type of land, like a chert pit, basically, and they turned their goats loose. And what little grass was growing, the goats began to eat. They began to defecate, and then they would plant more grass seed. They would move their goats around until soon they had some of the best land around. And then their neighbors started wanting them to bring their goats and pin them up and move them around in their areas that were dry too. And so they created this lush farmland. Now, when you look at Joel Salatin, this guy who has started this, you know, he didn't really start it, but he's kind of one of the big progenitors of the current movement. He started, you know, with Pasture Poultry book that I read, and you know, he talked about moving the chickens around, moving the pigs around, moving the cattle around, and he started with this land that was basically just a dusty piece of land, and before you know it, it's one of the best prime pieces of land that there is, because of how he has moved the animals around and kept the land fertile with the defecation and biomatter from the animals. You see the same thing in The Biggest Little Farm movie documentary of this couple that created a similar holistic farming method in California. They took some arid, just beat down land, and they turned it into an oasis. And these cover crops they planted, the soil that they had created with the defecation from their animals and their worm factory that they built to capture worm castings, and they would basically create this worm crap juice they'd spray on it in the beginning. But basically, they created this oasis, and where other farms were having topsoil washed away, losing crops, their ground absorbed that water, and it flourished in the drier times. And that's where I get this idea to tell you about the farming ecosystem, because it documents their whole walk through this system of dealing with, you know, bugs, coyotes, groundhogs, and then the coyotes are killing the groundhogs, and everything that they thought that they needed to get rid of ended up being a solution to a problem, until finally they learned how to mitigate it all to make this, you know, organic growing farm. Now, I'll tell you right off the bat, don't go to killing all your animal and pests off that are around your homestead. I did that one time. I killed a bunch of snakes that came in, started eating up the eggs. Little did I know there's a reason those snakes were coming in. A lot of times God has put into nature something that'll solve your problem. So those snakes were there to solve a problem, but I killed them because they were eating my eggs. I could afford to pay the snakes to hang around, because a few months later, there was a mother rat that took up residence in her coop in a certain area. I didn't realize it until she had a nest of babies, so I had to destroy that nest, and she ran off. Didn't have no way to stop her. Then a couple months later, all of a sudden, I would almost say it's the same one or one of her babies. We have another one in almost the exact same area. We run it out, we uncover it and find it, we run it out. Think the problem's gone. And then we've noticed there's some mice or rats, something's getting into feed in the garage. So we start putting out poison. That problem gets solved. And then out of nowhere, we come back from vacation, 7-day vacation. When people are not around, well, then that's when, these rodents will really show themselves. There's not a lot of human activity. My mother-in-law was supposed to be coming and feeding them, but she wasn't around the house. And so she was just there that one time a day, and then they leave. So then I come home one night from work right after this first little bit, and the boys said they had seen a mouse, and I was going to put out poison. I come home from work, and I see little beady eyes, and there's baby rats climbing up and down in my chicken coop. And then they're going over into the rabbit cages and drinking out of the water. So needless to say, I had an infestation because I killed off one of my supposed problems that was a solution to it. So that's what we do as humans. Sometimes we don't learn from our mistakes. I wouldn't kill a snake in my yard to save my life, or I would to save my life, but I wouldn't kill a snake, if you paid me right now, because that's nature's way. That's God's, engineered way to mitigate those rats. And so if I got a snake around, it's going to keep away the rats. One of the things that did happen that was very interesting, every feral stray cat for probably 20 miles decided to take up residence in the woods behind my house. Some of them have turned to pets now, and more or less are barn cats. And still you'll see them out there sitting on the post, but they began to take care of what I wasn't seeing. Because, when you don't see it, there's always some more. So needless to say, we got rid of that infestation. We had to turn up coops. We had to put out poison, and then those cats took care of some business. We lost some baby chicks because of it, but I learned a hard lesson there. There's a reason nature works the way it does. There's a reason their forefathers farmed the way they did, whether they knew it or not, because they were working with the nature around them. That is a very big threat, is somebody coming in and taking your food source away. If you are a homesteader, they're gonna stop you from growing that garden. You may have to move, and you have to start all over again. Or maybe there is, like what we've seen in Ohio, maybe a devastating accident that releases some kind of chemical into your soil. Maybe somebody poisons your property, and you lose all your heirloom seed that you had from the year before, like this man did. And you wonder, what is your solution? And right now, ReadyWise has this solution. This is something they sent us, and this is something I specifically asked about to rep, because I believe in these heirloom seed vaults. This is Wise Company, formerly Wise Company. It's ReadyWise now, but it is the seed vault. There's 39 varieties of heirloom seeds, 450 of these seeds, and then there's 10-year shelf life. This is made in America. You can use code CHAOS10 to save 10% right now on non-sale items at ReadyWise.com and ReadyWiseOutdoors.com. And they have this Wise Seed Vault. So what that will be for, you put that up for an emergency, just like you have your life insurance, your health insurance, you have your automobile insurance. You have all these different insurances. You need to have your food insurance. And as I do with my preparedness, I have that initial stock of food in case there's emergencies, or there's like we're seeing now, a mass fluctuation in the market. But also I have my food growing methods. I have my chickens, I have my rabbits, I have my gardening that I do. Then I have friends that do certain types of gardening, and we can get access to that. I have my fruit trees. But what if I lost all that? Well, then in steps, I've got to start all over again. God willing, I'll figure something out. But I have this seed vault to restart over with, kind of like with the Dust Bowl. If some of those families had these, something or some kind of coffee can full of old seeds put up, for an emergency, they would, and some of them likely did, they would be able to start over again, at least have a house garden on a small plot of land where they went to rent or work or whatnot. And then they could just keep the seed growing until they were able to purchase more land and start another farm. But we didn't have that. We had to go to the hybridized methods of seeds to help grow more food for war and for that type of devastation and loss of agriculture. There's been a lot of things that happen in the world over the years, and I can't tell you how to be prepared for everything in your own self. I always tell people to be how to be prepared but never scared. Always prepared but never scared. But it doesn't involve any preparation. Now, you can get your seed vault, and that's great, and that give you some level of preparation here in this life. And I believe the Lord wants us to do our little part for what we're doing here on earth. But when all else fails, Jesus Christ is my greatest preparation. And it's not something scientific that's convinced me. It's not something historic that's convinced me. It's simply just a consistent relationship with Christ that has given me a confidence in Him. See, you're talking to a person you can't convince otherwise, not because of some great, scientific evidence or theorem or anything of that nature. It's the statistical impossibility of coincidences that can no longer be called coincidences, that I have seen needs met and been taken care of and made my way in life to the point I am now. Even this podcast and the videos and followings that I've seen, that has nothing to do with any talent I have that hasn't been ordained by God and given to me through His Son Christ as I continue in this relationship with Him. And so I've seen a lot of things that God's done. And so if you're that person, maybe you felt this in your heart and you felt this need for just some higher help, and maybe you don't want it. Well, that's fine. So maybe you see this need for some higher help. Well, I invite you to come to know Christ as your Savior. Christ has been my Savior in many situations, as well as the Savior of my soul. And in these times, sometimes it helps to have somebody to lean on. So I'm going to say a prayer with you. I'm going to pray over you, and I'm going to pray that if you want to come to know Christ, that you begin to come to know Him as your personal Savior. Dear Heavenly Father, I pray that you touch those that are under the sound of my voice, whether they're watching this on a YouTube or Facebook video, or they're listening to it on the podcast or watching the podcast. I pray, Heavenly Father, that you just work in their lives and help them to confess their sins to you, their inability to do this on their own, and their need for you in their life, Lord, so that they can be saved and that they can have your help through the troubles that they face, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray, and they all said, amen. I hope that finds you today, that message finds you today in the right time and the right period, and that God brings that to just to light in your life, that you have help in these troubled times. So we thank you for coming and joining us for the Chaos Cast. Y'all have a good one. We'll see y'all later.